And with that, we are live. And we are going to be talking about the new UFO whistleblower. Psyop or truth teller, or something in between. Well, I'm not going to be addressing that alone. We've got Donnie Cho, as always, writing Sad Settle. And again, because he is the actual expert in this sort of field, Dr. Dean Bertram. How you doing, Dean?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. Before we get too far in, we do have an announcement to make, which is that this is one of 3 of last live Jason McLean Questions Everything on Wednesday nights, and we've got 3 left. So this is one of 3. June, I think 21st is the last broadcast, and it doesn't mean we're going away. Donnie and I are still going to be a part of the channel, right? We'll hop on, do guest spots, but everything's going to move to being pre-recorded on Jason McLean Questions Everything. We will do 1 live show a month, right? But we haven't quite settled on time and dates. In fact, that may be a floating thing depending on the guests that we want to have. But the show's evolving, right? We want to do some slightly different things, put a little bit more time into it, give y'all better products. So we're not going away. We're just changing some things up. And it also means you're going to get more 5, 10, 15-minute videos from me talking about things that, you know, we haven't really had a chance to address on the show because we're looking at one topic or another. And some things only have like 5 or 10 minutes worth of context. So again, we're not going anywhere. Jason McLean Questions Everything is the channel. Just hop on, like, follow, subscribe. That's where you'll find everything. And we're going to be doing 2 sort of longer videos a month. Donnie and I will. So that being said, we are, however, are not leaving a hole in the Texas Front Porch broadcast network. There is a show, I can say, coming, and it will be at 9 o'clock on Wednesdays. That's all I can say for now. But there is a show coming to fill this hole in your hearts on Wednesdays. But again, we're not going anywhere. You'll see Donnie and I popping up on all kinds of shows, talking all kinds of stuff. But go follow and subscribe to Jason McLean Questions Everything. Links in the doobly-doo below. And
we'll still be around. You'll still see us. Don't worry.
Oh, yeah. We'll still be around causing trouble. In fact, probably causing even more trouble, which is why we have a Rumble version of the show as well, because let's be honest, if any show is going to get shadow banned, it's us. So yeah,
I would be disappointed if we weren't.
Oh yeah, well, it's already happened a couple of times, so there's a reason why we do what we do. On that note, unfortunately Rob's not here, so I will run down the other shows for those who are listening on KPNL or Odyssey. Texas Front Porch, TEX' Front Porch, because it's his porch. On Mondays, we got Texas Front Porch. On Tuesdays, we've got Beyond BMR with Bigfoot Michigan Rob. And of course, Van Buren Variety also broadcasts on that day. Wednesdays, for another 2 weeks, you've got us, and then you'll get Danielle Diva after that. On Thursdays, you've got Bigfoot Michigan Rob with Brunch with Bigfoot Michigan Rob. And then that evening, you've got Blondes and the Booze Paranormal podcast. And on Friday, you get a little woo with the booze and Blondes, Booze, and the Woo. Also, don't forget Jessica Jones over on SOR Radio every Saturday and Sunday. Go give them a like and say howdy. And of course, on Tuesday, you can catch me and Dr. Dean Bertram on Mysterious Library on the Untold Radio Network. Again, everything in doobly-doo below. And Dean has another show on the Untold Radio Network called Talking Weird. Dean, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. It's every Saturday night live at 10 p.m. I might pre-record them occasionally, but it's pretty rare that I do. And it's essentially me just talking weird with people who are in the broader Fortean field. So might have a ufologist on one week, might have a filmmaker who made a documentary about Makele Mbembe the next week, might have a Bigfoot researcher the next week, a paranormal chick the next week. I mean, it's whoever I'm feeling I'd like to talk to and explore this very strange and weird world which we inhabit.
Donnie's probably his ears probably perked up when he heard Paranormal Chick.
Oh,
My ears perked up when I heard there's a Mokele Membi documentary out there. I want to watch that.
Yeah, The Explorer.
yeah.
You can see it. Yeah, on Vimeo. It's available on Vimeo from Alex Brasher, a French native documentarian who traveled with Michel Belot, a well-known cryptozoologist, looking for the Mokele Mbembe in the Congo Basin. It's a spectacular documentary. I mean, it's beautifully shot.
Good.
It's there on the
Really
ground.
good.
It's really worth seeing.
Yeah, we did an episode on that on Mysterious Library. It's really good. It really is. I was shocked.
Yeah, it's one of the best cryptid documentaries I've ever seen. And in many ways, it's about the people as much as about the cryptid itself. Like, it feels like a Werner Herzog documentary almost. You're following these explorers in this terrible situation where they're all losing heart because it's so difficult, and people seem to be pointing them in the wrong direction, and they can't find what they're looking for. And then there's a light at the end of the tunnel at the end. So it's a wonderful movie.
Yeah, it really is. It's worth a watch. So,
by the way, real quick, did you know Werner Herzog is a lifelong wrestling fan? I remember reading in an interview once when people asked him, "So you create all this fine films and documentaries. What do you do for entertainment?" He's like, "I watch wrestling."
Isn't that what we all do? We all do that for entertainment, right?
Yeah, he's like, I love wrestling. It's the only real entertainment for me. So I'm like, oh, okay, this guy loves wrestling.
It's the only real entertainment, period.
Yeah.
Or it used to be. I'll be honest, I don't watch it anymore. I was a big wrestling fan back in the day. Like, I'm going back to the original Hogan-Piper feud era all the way through the Attitude Era with Stone Cold. And if you're watching WCW, of course, the NWO. But by the time that era kind of petered out, when Austin's run had kind of finished, when the NWO
when he turned heel.
I enjoyed some of the heel turn because
some of it was funny.
Some of it was real funny. But that breaking glass, I don't think there was ever a time of excitement in the history of wrestling, except maybe the Hogan era, but it was a different kind of excitement. When that glass would break and Austin would run to the ring and then drop the stunner on half a dozen people.
Yeah.
And the crowd would go just insane. There was a certain, I don't know what there was, but there was magic in the wrestling.
Call it electricity in the air.
Yeah, there really was.
As I choke on air.
Speaking of
since we're talking
air.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of electricity in the air, as I choked to death on it. Sadly, since we're going to, we want to talk some old school wrestling for a bit, the Iron Sheik passed away today.
Passed away today.
So,
oh no, that's terrible news.
Yeah.
I think I saw the documentary. There was a documentary made recently about the Iron Sheik, if I recall.
Was there?
I think so. Either that or it was a TV special I saw about him in his older age. A lot of these wrestlers have got, like the Jake the Snake documentary was spectacular. And
that was a good one.
And Scott Hall featured in that a bit as well. We lost Scott Hall as well, of course, recently. I don't
you're right.
I don't get sad when celebrities pass that often, but when some wrestlers pass, like when we lost Piper, I was devastated.
Me too.
Piper, I had a life-size poster of Piper on my wall as a kid. I was such a fan. I was always a fan of the, the anti-heroes, the contrarians. And when Hall died, I was, quite, taken back as well. It was like, man, it's the end of an era with one of the original NWO gone.
I got real sad when Antonio Inoki died. That guy was a legend.
Yeah, we seem to lose more and more all the time. I guess it's as we age, our heroes disappear as well. Did you guys see the recent, or hear the song of see the recent music video? Remember when, I think it might just be called Hulk Hogan slammed Andre the Giant.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the lyrics are.
One of you shared that with me.
I did. I sent it to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had tears running down my face watching that. I remember WrestleMania 3. I remember when we watched it. It wouldn't have been like a pay-per-view in Australia. Back then, we got them on a major network, and we probably got them delayed. But there was no internet, so you didn't know who'd won or not. And I remember when Hogan picked up Andre and slammed him. It was a big deal.
Yeah. So here's so Donnie, here's your thing now. You need to, when you finally get around to launching your channel, you need to have Dean on to talk about professional wrestling.
Oh, I'm going to have Dean and Tex on and Randy because we're all wrestling fans. And then we're going to do just pro wrestling talk.
And you can talk, and to Glenn's point, y'all can talk about the gorgeous ladies of wrestling.
The Magnificent Mona. Remember the Magnificent Mona?
I don't, actually.
Yeah, she was an older gal, I think, if I recall.
Anyway, but yeah, so that is your new mission. You can have Dean and Randy and Texan.
My favorite name from Glow was Matilda the Hun. I loved her.
I like that. Okay, I got to
awesome.
give credit on that one. That's actually pretty clever. I like that one. So while we could definitely stand here and I could definitely just nod my head because I've never been that big of a wrestling fan while y'all talk about wrestling, we do have a question to answer.
Mm-hmm.
One that is pertinent and being asked by many people, which is whether or not this new whistleblower is a whistleblower or if he's a Pied Piper.
Real quick leading up to this, on other shows and listening to people talk within the UFO community, I've been hearing some chatter prior to this, leading up to the events of our whistleblower, that people were talking about how there was going to be some bombshell dropped. It's going to turn the entire UFO community upside down. This was like probably days prior to the news,
right?
Where people were talking about, oh man, there's a whistleblower coming out and it's going to change everything. And then a couple days, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, my YouTube feed starts filling up. I see I see articles online of this guy who comes out and claims, right? Makes some claims.
Yep.
I don't know, Jason, do you want to break down some of the things he said, or?
Yeah, I mean, so David Charles Grusch, Grusch, whatever. I y'all know how bad I am with names. I had to pull it up so I can make certain I got it right. But Mr. Grusch was, and he was with the Air Force. He was part of the UAP study. He's also a former intelligence officer. That much we know to be the case, right? Well, I don't want to be one of those people, but at the same time, it's like, well, at least we know that to be the case. At least that's how it's been presented to us. You never really are 100%, but it seems like the most likely answer is that is what he is, right? Is that he is ex-military. He is a former intelligence officer. So he comes out and he says, I mean, honestly, this is the bigger point here. Yes, we've had extraterrestrial craft crash on this planet. The United States has obtained and retrieved these craft and their occupants and has been studying them to develop weapons technology and other technologies for decades now. And that this information was withheld from the official UAP, the official UAP study that's going on right now that, Congress is involved in and all that. They're like, that was withheld from everyone, but this is what's been going on. So that's really what it comes down to is that he is saying on the record, extraterrestrial craft, including life forms, have been recovered. And they've been researched and, reverse engineered to try and figure out how this stuff works in order to develop technology. And that was withheld from Congress and the sort of civilian power structures.
Well, other than the fact that Philip J. Corso wrote a best-selling book in the late 90s, which said the exact same thing, so every person on the planet has already heard the story. I'm not even sure what's new in this story, to be honest.
No, that's exactly. So that's kind of where I want to start with this, right?
Corso was higher ranking than this whistleblower anyway. So we've already had a very high-ranking military officer who was in a foreign technology retrieval program come forward with the exact same story, and now it's all of a sudden news when 20 years later we hear the same story again.
Well, it's not just Corso, though. He's a great example of the same thing, but we've had a Canadian defense minister say the exact same thing. In fact, even give more. And this guy was, I can never remember his name. And he was essentially the Canadian equivalent of like Donald Rumsfeld. And he's like, no, we're in contact with them. They've come to Earth. So yeah, to your first point, which I think is a brilliant one, is he's not saying anything new. And he's not even the highest ranking person in any military to say this. So why is it a story now?
Well, it's clearly an intentional story. What fascinates me, and I, as I mentioned to you gentlemen before the show, I hadn't been following this story as it broke. I looked into it when you asked me to do the show. I've been super busy with hanging out with my daughter at the lake and working on my feature documentary, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers. But when you asked me to, I did a little digging, and I didn't have very long to do digging. So essentially that was just reading the debrief article on the story because it's probably, I'm guessing, the most important piece out there, and then looking a little bit at the individuals who were involved. So again, I think real expert analysis of this, it takes some serious digging. But I think that the first thing that obviously probably comes to mind is that the story in the debrief was written by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, which are the same journalists that blew the story about the Tic Tac video on the front pages of the New York Times back in 2017. It's also interesting that Blumenthal came out in the documentary Accidental Truth recently from MUFON, which you and I have also talked about on Mysterious Library, Jason, saying, well, for the people that say that this was all engineered and controlled release, I can assure you it wasn't. So the same person telling me it wasn't a controlled release when he gave me that part of the pie is now giving me a new part of the pie as the front man, as the front press agent on the story, and I'm sure he'll still tell me that none of this is engineered. The second thing which jumped out at me, of course, when I read it was that Grusch himself wrote the language in the Defense Department kind of new protocol, which was, I think, championed by, who championed it? Marco Rubio and Kirsten Gillibrand for the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, which essentially protected whistleblowers coming out talking about UFO type stuff. So the guy who's now the whistleblower is the person who wrote the language in the act which lets whistleblowers come out and say what they want to say. So there's a clearly structured plan that this is going forward from relatively high ranks within presumably the US government at a civilian level and at a military level. Now, the next thing which jumped out at me, and then I'll stop talking, but these were the things which really popped out at me.
Oh, no. This is why this is why we brought you on. Donnie and I had the plan of just sitting here and listening to you talk.
Well, the second thing which really jumped out at me, and then when I dug into it, it jumped out all the more, is that it said Grusch is represented by Charles McCulloch III, who's the senior partner of the Compass Rose Legal Group in Washington. He was the original Inspector General of the intelligence community, confirmed by the U.S. Senate back in 2011, which means he was an Obama appointee, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so regardless, it doesn't really matter who appointed him, really. But it is interesting that he worked with under Clapper, James R. Clapper, who was the person he liaised with all the time. And Clapper, of course, is anybody who's followed any of the type of Russiagate story knows that Clapper and Comey and crew were at the forefront of pushing that story out to CNN and the like. There was a very clear plan on how they were going to release the Steele dossier information to the press and how they were going to brief Trump on it. And then they were going to then have CNN ready to drop the story that Trump now knows about the Steele dossier. So my point is that this is the swamp incarnate, the people that we're looking at here. And that's not even by my definition. That's by other people out there who look at these people and place these people within the swamp. Now, the organization that McCulloch was a President Obama appointee, I just checked. What else I find fascinating is the firm that he works for and became a partner not that long ago. And I think now he's a fairly senior partner, I believe. I think he took a pretty big position straight away. That firm, which I just mentioned, which was, what was the name of the firm again? I'm just looking at it because it's important to. It
was the Rose
facts right. Yeah.
Compass.
Yeah, that's right. I think the main front man for that firm, or the main partner, is Andrew P. Bacage. I might be mispronouncing his name, and he's former CIA, and he is the person who essentially was involved with running the whistleblower who came forward, which launched the Trump-Ukraine scandal. So the person who's representing the whistleblower in the Trump-Ukraine scandal is the same firm which is now representing the whistleblower in this new UAP story. Bacage is also somebody who he interned under Patrick Moynihan, Charles Schumer, and Hillary Clinton when he was at George Washington University. So he essentially interned with the most significant Democrat senators, arguably, of the last, 50 years. So he's clearly with inside the, with inside this, the Washington loop, I suppose you would call it. And when and he's somebody who I believe is also involved in an awful lot of the initial kind of whistleblower legislation, and how internally a
Mhm.
lot of this whistleblower stuff was kind of worked out. So it seems like there was this almost this mechanism in place which became a private firm,
Mhm.
which then represents people that are supposedly coming out of the military with these secrets which they want told, which become significant stories. Now, I can't
Yeah.
obviously say I don't know if this is the way it was engineered. This is all total speculation. But when you see people within those relatively
Yeah.
high positions of power who have been involved in other whistleblower cases and have real strong connections with
Mhm.
intelligence, real strong connections with important senators who are part of the power elite. They're not just a senator who comes and goes. They're people who are there and part of the Washington power structure. And then when you see somebody who comes forward as the UAP whistleblower who drafted the language in the legislation that let him be the whistleblower, it seems to me, again, this is just a very fast glance at the story, and that the story is dropped by the same people who dropped the 2017 story about Tic Tac, which started
Mhm.
this whole new approach
Mhm.
to the phenomenon off again. It seems to be that you can kind of start to see this structure in place, which is doing specific things, and which is very much not this outside, haha, gotcha
Right.
kind of force, but very much this inside incredibly powerful people
Mhm.
positioned in incredibly important positions. Some of them have retired and now doing it privately, but still presumably with all these connections, because I don't believe you leave that kind of loop and you don't have your connections and your influence anymore. I mean, there's old things, you work for the agency once, you always work for the agency, or once CIA, always CIA, all those type of
Yeah.
things we've always heard. So you see this structure in place. These are the people who are breaking the story. These are the people who have engineered how they can
Mhm.
legally break the story. And you start to think, how engineered is this thing? Is this just
Hmm.
one guy who comes forward and decides to blow the whistle, or is this some much more complex machinery that I can just see a few of what, to me, again, this is just me speculating,
Mhm.
look like mechanisms of a bigger machine in place, because I do a cursory 10-minute read of an article in the debrief, and all of a sudden things start hitting me as this looks really engineered at a sophisticated level.
So there's a couple things I
Mhm.
want to address real quick, because I think some people hear, some of the names that were dropped and think, "Oh, this is a political thing." No, no, no. There's something there is, again, one of those longer episodes that Donnie and I are going to do, and a few episodes I'm going to do on my own that are shorter are going to cover some of what you were talking about as far as these other agencies and these other sort of private individuals um that we kind of need to address. I want to start but again, I want to start where you ended about no people never really leaving the, they go into the private sector, and that's just them operating for, say, the CIA or the FBI in the private sector. Uh, I think it was last year or year before that on Texas Front Porch. We had a friend of mine who is formerly of the Dallas Police Department. He was in the homicide. He worked his way very, very high. He started off in the sheriff's department, right? So he knew all of the guys that were involved in the Kennedy, Kennedy's death, right? Like from a sheriff's department perspective. One of the things he talked about is he talked to the women who were overseeing the switchboard back in the day, right?
Hmm.
And so this is the part that really always blew my mind, because I'm like, that's your smoking gun. Because again, this is the 60s, so they had to do a switchboard thing, right?
Mhm.
So he gets his phone call, and the FBI are sitting there. They're ready. They're ready to tape everything, the whole 9 yards. He gives them the phone number for the switchboard to put it through to. It's a number in Virginia and a name. The FBI says, don't put that call through. Just say there was no answer. And they shut everything up and left. They tracked it down. There was like two people in that city at that time who had the same name, and they were able to trace that phone number essentially to someone who's ex-CIA. And back in the 60s and 70s and even early 80s, before we had all this, the internet and everything, if you got into trouble and you were an asset, I think it would work for agents as well, but definitely an asset, you would call someone who was a retired agent, right? That is everything's got off the rail and I need help. That's your contact person. So this is so to your point of when no one actually leaves these organizations, that's 100% true. We know that they don't. And we saw it with the Twitter files, where you had all these former FBI agents moving to Twitter to become, to work with them, and then they have their own Slack channel, and they're essentially just working for the FBI but being paid by Twitter. So I kind of want to start there. To your point, yeah, this guy, and I knew you would go there almost immediately, which is why I love you so much. Again, it's like, before we even address what this dude was saying or even his credentials, who's he talking to? Why is he the guy up front? Because real quick, and I knew one of y'all would get me. Paul Hellyer was the Canadian Defense Minister who's been talking about all this for 15 years now. And again, he was essentially the Canadian equivalent of Donald Rumsfeld, and he's been talking about this. Why isn't that a bigger story? A Wink at Me got us with Nick Pope, right? Again, former British defense minister. He's been talking about this stuff forever. So why is it this guy is the one who's getting on all the television shows right now? Why is everyone focusing on him when he hasn't said anything that plenty of people have been saying for a long time? And what you did is look at who these people are talking to. Look at who's behind him. Again, I wanted to address one thing, as a lot of people would say, well, you dropped a lot of politically charged comments. The thing that Dean is talking about that is one of the biggest issues with the whole Trump thing is, in many ways, Trump wasn't a part of this upper CIA circle. And we're seeing that now. People asked about, because you mentioned the Rose Compass law firm. People say, well, hold on, wasn't the Rose law firm the one Hillary Clinton worked for in the 80s, where she magically made $100,000 in cattle futures? Everyone's like, that doesn't happen. I don't believe they're the same law firm. We can look into it. I don't think they're the same law firm. But yeah, that's the thing. One of these dark secrets that people don't like to talk about is Hillary Clinton's a CIA asset. That's not a radical conspiracy theory. We know that she is. The Rose Law Firm is one of those private organizations that's a front for the CIA, just like AIG, just like a lot of these businesses, a lot of these law firms are essentially how the CIA operate in the world. It isn't James Bond stuff. It's attorneys. It's insurance agents. That's how they launder information to and from, themselves to other nations. For those of you who were listening to us when we talked about Ghislaine Maxwell, right? Her father was essentially a front for multiple intelligence operations during the Cold War. And what was he supposed to be? A newspaper man. Like, he owned several newspapers. Well, that was how they moved and moved information and got information. It's what we're looking at. When we look at the names connected that Dean has brought up, what we are seeing is the CIA sort of behind a veil of names that no one's ever going to talk about, because they're just going to throw him out there because he's got a story they want you to hear.
Well, speaking of the CIA and Clinton and this law firm, Chuck McCulloch, in his own bio, I believe I pulled this from, actually ran the intelligence community's investigation and analysis into Secretary Hillary Clinton's emails during her tenure as Secretary of State, which of course we know nothing happened except a little slap on the wrist, and it didn't affect her at all. So it's interesting that the other partner there used to intern for Hillary Clinton. This guy was the guy who led the intelligence department's investigations into the email scandal, and now this is the same firm which representing a UFO whistleblower, who's the same whistleblower who wrote the legislation that let him be a whistleblower. So there's nothing suspicious to see here. This is all above board.
Yeah, This is so, which leads me to Alien Girl 111's question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Donnie?
Oh, no, go ahead.
So she says, the real question is, how many times does this have to be told before people finally believe it? Well, I think that's ultimately the heart of the question is, what is it that they want us to believe? And why do they want us to believe it? Which is actually Titan's literal question right here is, for all of us, what do y'all suppose, their chief goal is, in this disclosure, right? So again, the question is, what is it they want us to believe, and why do they want us to believe it? Those are the questions that we really need that this is really about, because as you said off the top, there's nothing this guy's saying that's actually new at all. Lots of people have said this. A lot of people higher ranking have said this. So why is it getting all the attention now? Why is it that 2017 happens and everyone's like, oh, time to talk about this stuff? And now this happens, or well, time to talk about this. And you see the names associated, and you're like, this doesn't feel on the up and up per se.
So I watched that interview a couple times today just to kind of get ready for the show. And man, that guy really didn't say anything new, did he? He just says, oh yeah, the U.S. is in possession of alien technology and we got a couple bodies. Oh yeah? Oh yeah. Really? We heard that a million times by now.
And I think
that's nothing new.
We've literally heard this. Sorry. I was going to say, we literally heard this in the 70s from what's his face? The Honeymooners.
William Moore, Stanton Friedman, Charles Berlitz. Yeah. I know who you mean, Jackie Gleason.
Jackie Gleason literally told us this story on freaking The Tonight Show with Carson. This is not new at all. And and you're like, well, why are you bringing up Jackie Gleason when you have all these other people? This is so old. This story is so old. That's the point. Jackie Gleason was talking about how Nixon took him to an Air Force base and showed him the bodies. This story is not new.
And I think that answers the first part of that two-part question is, what do they want us to believe? They want us to believe that the US government has retrieved extraterrestrial technology and bodies and that they have back-engineered flying saucers. That's clearly what they want us to believe. And there was a period where they were happier for it to be a fringe belief for a long time, but never having left the broader kind of conversation of the public. And now there seems to be, since 2017, a push to make that a respectable position for mainstream media and government to talk about. So it was allowed to float in the fringes up until 2017, and then there was an acceleration to this is going to be almost the official narrative, and that seems to me to be what they want us to believe. That's easy to answer than the second part of the question as to why, by the way.
Because once you factor in the existential crisis of extraterrestrial beings, those old social contracts suddenly start seeming a lot less important, and I think that's got something to do with it, really. I saw that guy. I watched that guy, and I was like, "Yo, this guy's like, dude. If you're gonna troll us, at least make it interesting,
Yeah.
Well, at least say like, yo, we got Zeta Reticuli over here. They've been sending their scouts. I mean, everything he said was so broad and vague. He was like, it was just so dull. The guy was just like, "Yep, government's got aliens. We got a couple ships."
See, I don't think people are shocked anymore by it. I'm not sure. I see your point, Donnie. And there was for a long time, people thought this would shatter the social construct and it would shatter Christianity and everything else. But I think we have been so engineered to accept this talking point as a culture since the 1940s almost, but certainly with an acceleration through the 60s up until today, that it's not even shocking anymore. I think Joshua Cutchin said something quite telling, and I believe it was Ecology of Souls, where he said, what would be more shocking to your average American these days? To be told that all this Roswell type story is true and we're being visited by ETs and the government of back-engineered sources or whatever, or that the Iliad is literally factually true. In other words, gods are coming down and interfering with us and being involved in our battles and our lives. I mean, what would be more shocking? That there was a supernatural presence interjecting its will into our lives, or that there are ETs and the government has shot down a couple of sources or retrieved a couple of sources and had some bodies in Wright-Patterson or Area 51 and back engineered a couple sources. I know what one I think would be more of an existential crisis for your average member of the citizenry today.
I think there are some people out there who would be okay. So if it was a question of what would be more shocking, if it turns out the government was doing all this, like hiding alien bodies and spacecraft and technology, or if it turns out the government really didn't, or really hasn't been hiding alien bodies and really had zero contact with UFOs and was just like, what? I'd be more shocked at that.
Yeah.
If the government really didn't have UFOs, I was like, you don't have any UFOs? They were like, nah.
That second one's probably closer to the truth.
Yeah,
that second one's probably closer to the truth, to be honest. If I had to put money on either, I'd put money on the second bet.
And this is one of those things where, again, you get a lot of the entire argument that happens in this community. We don't fully appreciate how much the United States government has interfered in your view of all of this. From word one, right? I think Dean and I have slightly different perspectives on, like, say, from the late 40s to the maybe early 70s. I think we're all in agreement from that point on, where the government clearly is more, I don't want to say malevolent, but I'll say malevolent in their interaction in deliberate manipulation of researchers, right? With Richard Doty and OSI and all. Again, if y'all have not seen Mirage Men, just as a starter, please go watch that. Where we would, where again, I think Dean and I have slightly different perspectives. Is I think it, and I agree with him, it wasn't as heavy-handed in like the 40s and 50s and 60s, but we can see from very, very early on, the United States government has been actively manipulating this entire story. And a great example of this is nothing more than the original story from which we get, the phrase flying saucer, right? Kenneth Arnold's sightings, right? At Mount Rainier. He sees several different craft traveling, right? And he's a great observer here. This is like Kenneth Arnold's observations are very, very valid. And the most famous version of the aircraft that everyone sort of knows, and in this field, is that sort of crescent shape with that little tail, point coming out. However, he describes this as being very, very flat. There's also some other shapes that he talks about, right? We're more like a pancake that's flattened on one end, and so he puts these out here. He initially does not start off with them being UFOs or extraterrestrial craft or anything like that, but rather a military project. The UFO stuff comes later, and Dean can speak more on that because he gets involved with Ray Palmer and all of that. And this is another one of those drawings where you have that more flattened, sort of pancake with a flattened end. Well, here's the thing. Speaking as an artist, someone who knows how people see things, right? This is your eyewitness drawing. Let's look at that crescent-shaped craft, right? And again, if you're listening on KPNL or Odyssey, you do need to go to Texas Front Porch, TEX' Front Porch to see this, or to Jason McLean Questions Everything on YouTube. But this is one of the initial flying wings that we recovered from Nazi Germany, which was flown here by Nazi test pilots and worked on by Nazi scientists that we whitewashed their histories in order to have them do this kind of work for us right after World War II. And this is where my artist point comes in. As an artist, I'm here to tell you, if that's your eyewitness drawing, the crescent shape on the craft on the side, that is what he saw. The details that are different are minor when you're talking about someone who is seeing something. It's in motion. He's not fully, he doesn't really understand what he's looking at. His mind just is recreating the shapes as best he can. That's the same aircraft, 100%. Which, and by the way, this is now I've actually seen this aircraft. We have one here in Dallas, Texas, at the Flight Museum. There were other versions of this, the flying pancake. This is also based off of Nazi design. And we have UFO aircraft, that instead of using propellers, use jet engines for this. Again, this is straight up what they were looking at.
That
They
thing
were
looked like it couldn't fly at all, though. Did you see the shit?
Oh, they do.
That thing
No, they
was.
did. Now it just
You
didn't do
saw
what we
that?
wanted them to do,
Oh,
but it
man.
absolutely flew. Yeah,
That thing looked like a frog.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and the Nazis were working on a lot of really radical designs
Mhm.
at that time, and one of the reasons the flying wing took so long to really develop is we had to develop certain computerized systems to fly them the way we wanted to fly them, because it's very, very complicated work for what we wanted them to do. The simple fact of the matter is, from word one, the United States military has used UFOs to hide their experiments involving Nazi technology, with Nazi scientists, and this also includes Japanese scientists and Japanese pilots. It's not a coincidence that all these UFO aircraft, crashes happened in the American Southwest in the 50s and 60s. That's not a coincidence. But you know what's a really good cover? UFOs. It's a great cover for hiding, the fact that you're experimenting on to see if people's cattle are showing signs of radiation poisoning or poisoning from all the crap that you've done. Go kill them at night, take the samples, make it look like it's something weird. Now everyone's like, oh, it's just one of those weird UFO things.
Yeah, that was certainly Bill Cooper's position.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Cooper, by the end, was like, there's no aliens. The government are just doing these tests on cattle to see what the low-level radiation leaks are actually doing to the reproductive systems and in their, their udders and in all the places you would expect. And like you just said then, that it was all government, US government technology. And I think there's a very strong argument for all of those. I mean, I'm much more comfortable with that than rolling into the extraterrestrial interpretation. I do think earlier, I know I'm not quite as suspicious of the early days of government, I guess, malfeasance perhaps as you are. I think earlier it might have been a case of one hand really not knowing what the other one was doing. Like when the FBI were running out investigating Maury Island and things, and J. Edgar Hoover was, wondering what the devil was going on back at his desk. They might very well not have known that these type of craft were being flown by some top secret, branch of an ever-changing military in those days, because it was shifting. The whole military arrangement, as we know, was shifting after World War II as well. So I think there was a period where, and even possibly people in various branches of the armed services, even today, by the way, that's probably the case. There's probably lots of people who have no idea if there is some kind of secret UFO program, be that extraterrestrial, or be it us with advanced Nazi technology 80 years later. Imagine where it would be today. So I think that I think your position is valid. I that is an interpretation that I am very comfortable with.
I was just thinking, what if, okay, let's hypothetically speaking, if everything is true, right, and the government does have possession of all this alien technology and craft, and they're back engineering, right, and they're really coming from a source, the other aliens. That means the other aliens must be looking at this planet being like, my God, they got their hands on our technology. It would be like, they would look at us like a bunch of like chimpanzees with AK-47s. They don't know how to handle, you might as well just give them a gun to a monkey.
That leads into another great point, Donnie, which I was very conscious of when I was reading this debrief thing as well. Are these things just flying out of the sky, just falling out of the sky like snowflakes? Like there's talk in this debrief report that there's multiple recoveries all around the world. Like, are the aliens just sending up their, like, their student learner drivers to fly these things, so they're crushing them everywhere? Is their technology aliens that crappy that they can really come from Zeta Reticula, but when they're here, oops, there goes another one. Dag nabbit, the US Air Force boys got that one again. Like, it's such a ludicrous idea. The only way that makes some sense is something Jacques Vallée writes in the otherwise intellectually offensive Trinity, the best kept secret, right? And that is the possibility that maybe these things are being given to us. I don't think that's the case. I'm much closer to your interpretation that you just went through, Jason. But if we are acquiring this technology, I I find it so difficult to believe that this advanced extraterrestrial species coming here is just having accidents all around the planet. Perhaps there's
those Zeta Reticuli, man. I mean, they're like the Asian drivers of the galaxy or something.
Yeah,
I won't even comment.
I don't know.
See, I get to make that joke.
You get to see. I got to just shut up on that.
If I disappear, it's because of what just happened. We've got a storm rolling through.
Oh, okay. But no, just quickly, my point though is that to Valet's point, if we are recovering this technology, if this is a genuine true story, if we're picking up non-human technology all over the place, then I think when Valet finally swings by Trinity to this more accepting idea of the idea of alien, meaning non-human hardware being acquired by us, which he never believed prior to that book Trinity, then I do think if just to let us shift gears a little bit, because this is all just us playing with ideas anyway, if we are acquiring this much downed alien technology, then to me, if that's true, and I don't think it is, but if it was true, then I would be leaning towards the idea that we were given this intentionally for some reason. And it might be because these things aren't really from Zeta Reticuli. It might be because they're from somewhere else and want to present. That's, again, all of this is totally just playing with ideas now. But if a non-human intelligence is dropping craft all over the planet, then that doesn't necessarily mean it's extraterrestrial. It just means it's not us. Or it doesn't even necessarily mean it's not, it doesn't even necessarily mean it's not us. It could be another country dropping weird technology. I don't think that's the case. That stretches it even more. But it seems more likely that this stuff's being dropped on purpose than there's just all these advanced ET crafts just having collisions and falling everywhere.
Yeah. They can travel hundreds of light years to get here in a time frame that would be considered convenient for them. And they have trouble with turbulence.
Yeah. Remember one of the Roswell stories? Because there's lots of versions. One of them was that there was a collision between two sources, and this is one version. One saucer went down here and one scattered here. It was like, really?
Or maybe they were downed by other UFOs.
Maybe.
Well, and that goes.
Maybe Shape's right. The Darrow in the cavern of fighting ETs coming back and cataclysm that we're just watching these things drop. What's that? Another one of them sources, boys.
So real quick, because y'all got some great comments and stuff we're going to definitely get to in the second hour. But one thing I do want to say, because it would be very easy for people to say, oh, so you don't think that anything weird is going on? That is not any of our positions. I do think that there are UFOs and encounters with entities that's not the United States government, right? That is legitimately exotic. It is weird. But the question is, within this broader framework, I think that's a much more narrow slice of that pie than people would like to think. I think a much larger piece of this pie is this military system, right? And so the question becomes, to Dean's earlier point, none of this looks like he's some honest whistleblower who's just trying to come forward and tell us the truth. This whole thing is clearly planned. The question is, what do they want us to believe? Well, Dean's already addressed that because it's clear what they want us to believe. The other question is then why? Right? Why do they want us to believe this particular story? That's the question. Because yes, there is something really weird out there going on. There is. But honestly, it doesn't look like that's what what the government is currently doing is necessarily has anything to do with that material at all. Right? This clearly is something more human in nature and in origin and has been for a long time. So the question becomes, so then why? What is the goal? What do we get? And we will get to that in the second hour because we're getting ready to take a break. But before we do that, let me throw a couple of y'all's questions out there. Let's see. We already did that one. Scott says they are food feed. Can't talk. They are spoon feeding it to us, which goes back to Dean's whole point. Everyone involved in this whistleblower is very much involved in. Let's be honest. It's the intelligence agencies, which, by the way, does include the FBI. The FBI is now an intelligence agency. It's not a law enforcement agency. That's been obvious for quite some time. Larry Meitzer asks a really interesting question. I think we should probably come back to this in the second hour as well. But he says, but so would you want our adversaries to think we have special technologies? Well, now I think we need to come back to that question, because that's a great sort of question, because if you believe that we have downed UFO material, then you're telling these other governments, hey, we've got technology thousands of years more advanced than you. We can do all this whiz-bang stuff. But my question then would be, is that who we're actually aiming this at? Is this information aimed at other countries, or is it aimed at us, the American people? That's how I would ask that question. And we're going to definitely come to that on the other side of the break. But one last one. Magnus Zerum asks, the TikTok, Elizondo, and now this all seems to be connected to the swamp. As such, I distrust it. Good instinct. Can we get a saucer to perform with the Blue Angels? That'd be cool.
They fly in nearby skies. I know they do some of the Air Force things from the Nellis type area, and then around the Groom Lake area. And so supposedly there are saucers popping up out of there like clockwork, if you believe Bob Lazar, or at least back in the day.
Yep. No, exactly. Which goes back to the question, to the show that we did, where, why has Bob Lazar not been Epsteined, right? Whether and again, I think it's because he's an asset, but it's like, even if he was legitimate, and that's awfully close. Even if it was
that thunder going on in your background, Jason?
Yeah, we got a thunderstorm rolling in.
Whoa. Sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, it's coming right over us. It doesn't seem to be tornadic when I saw it earlier, so just a thunderstorm. But it's like, if he was legitimate and thought, and every claim he made is what he thought and was legitimate, it still means he's still saying what the government wants him to say, or he'd have been Clintoned.
Couldn't we say that about the new whistleblower as well? Surely when he was getting all his ducks in a row and writing the legislation, somebody would have been going, this guy's writing the legislation, saying if he wants to whistleblow, he's legally protected to whistleblow. I wonder if he's about to whistleblow. Yeah. I mean, come on. It's everything from TikTok on is just so obvious. It's just so obviously this intentional, just structured, controlled release of information, which is pointing towards making people think one thing. It's blatantly obvious. Now, are paying attention?
Well, that does seem to be the point. But we're going to come back to that point in 5 minutes. Smoke him if you got him.
Four minutes to go, folks. 4 minutes. Three minutes. We're almost there. 2-minute warning, guys. 2-minute warning. One minute. 1 minute.
And welcome back to the second hour of Jason McLean Questions Everything live. Before I bring up Dean and Donnie, I just want to give a thank you to everyone who's watching, whether you're live in chat or you're watching on replay. We love y'all. Y'all are why we do this, and y'all are the best audience on the internet, and I'll fight anyone who says otherwise, which means I fight Donnie a lot. You know how it goes. That having been said, though, quick refresh for those who may not have heard at the beginning of the first hour. Jason McLean Questions Everything is not long for this particular time slot in this particular fashion. We've got 2 more weeks after this, and then Wednesday nights we will no longer be live on Wednesday nights. We will be doing 2 pre-recorded longer episodes on Jason McLean Questions Everything, and we'll do shorter, standalone videos in between, and we will do 1 live a month. The channel has to grow, has to evolve. Y'all probably noticed we've been doing different topics for a while. This is just an evolution of this. And so we've got 2 more weeks after this one of live on Wednesday nights at 7:00. Then after that, the show will be replaced by Danielle. That's as far as I can say. And I think it will start at 9 in the evening. So, that's going to be how it goes. And again, we're still going to be around. Donnie and I will be popping up on everyone's channel as guests from time to time, or if they need a fill-in host. We're not leaving, but we are growing and changing and evolving as everything should do. So again, we love y'all. We look forward to seeing y'all over there. And again, addressing some new topics in new ways, because there's a bigger conversation that needs to be had out there, and we're going to be the ones to have it. On that note, let us return to the fray with Donnie and, of course, Dr. Dean Bertram. Again, y'all have got some great questions and comments in here that we will be addressing here in the second hour. So let's just sit here and look at Donnie for a second. Y'all need to cherish these moments, because you're not going to have them when we go to the pre-record onlys. Now he mutes himself.
Sorry about that. I had a major. Oh man, I turned my mic off. It turned on by itself. I blame you, Jason. It's your fault. It's your fault.
Yeah.
I had a major catastrophe happen on my desk. I spilled all over myself and had to run up and grab a towel. And
It's not the first time that's happened, Donnie.
No, you turn my mic on.
Uh-huh.
That was on you.
Yep. Okay. Sure.
Anyway, during the break,
Anyway,
is it okay real quick
moving
if
on.
I could bring up a
Yes.
dream that I had a few years ago, which kind of ties into this whole thing, right? A few years
Yes.
back, I had this dream that I was in this like really
Even if it
old
didn't tie in, I'd like to hear it.
I was in this really old style schoolhouse, right? Like the kinds they had in like back in the day in America. And I was teaching a class, but in the class there were all these people from like the 1920s, 1910s, early 20th century, late 19th century, right? And it was all these people, like Americans, like older rural people, and they were all. I remember their colors being faded, and they were all sitting in this desk at these desks at this schoolhouse, and I was myself explaining to them what the future was like, or what our current day is like, right? So I'm explaining to them like pop culture, the way people dress, the way people talk, the kind of foods they ate, like just the life. And they're all gasping and in amazement. And then at one point, one of the gentlemen in the back raises his hands and he asks, so what are guns like? And I'm like, well, they're kind of the same as they were in your day. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you know, the 1911, yeah, we still use that. And they're like, it didn't change. Everything else changed. And I'm like, well, I mean, they look better. They're better designed. But at the end of the day, it's the same technology. It's the same basic concept of how gunpowder works. And, you know, you got and then someone asked me, well, what about cars? And then they're asking me all these questions. I'm like, well, cars, they generally work the same as, I mean, it's still a combustion engine at the end of the day, right? And they're like, it's the same thing. Yeah, I mean, it's better designed, but it's at the end of the day, it's the same idea. But they were so amazed at like all the advances and everything else. But they're like, but your cars and your guns are the same. And they all looked, some of the men looked so let down.
Well, there's still no better design than the 1911 in a handgun. So,
but so when I was thinking about the alien technology, it's like, it's real funny how some of our technology, like, yeah, it's better designed, but it didn't really jump that much. Like if they really had access to a UFO and they were going after all the, I don't know, the propulsion technology, the anti-gravity technology, I mean, that would I mean, how come we were not seeing that, right? Our planes still work the same, don't they? The same scientific principle that we use to fly planes is the same. That hasn't changed since day one.
Yeah, I mean, this is something a lot of people have noted. Yeah, a lot of people made the same point, which is that, hey, if we had all this stuff, why is it that all of our technology seems to follow a pretty steady progression that one would expect, right? In a lot of ways, and this is one of those things I think we don't really stop to think about. The SR-71 was 1960s technology. The F-111 was 1960s and 70s technology. The F-22 Raptor is 1980s technology. By the time something rolls out, it is 30-year-old technology. By the time it actually gets to production and is running and is in popular service, it's 30 years behind what we're working on and developing.
But then there are other
a lot of what's holding us back has been, well, a lot of what's holding us back, to your point, the technology that has advanced is the stuff that we need to make a lot of this stuff work, like computers, right? Computing power has to get to a certain point in order for us to do the calculations needed to do a lot of this stuff.
Well, Corso just quickly said things like fiber optics and Kevlar were from the Roswell crash. So there was, I'm playing devil's advocate, there were specific technologies which he pointed at and said that was Roswell, that was Roswell, that was Roswell.
I mean, there's some technologies that we have that if we showed to someone like 40 years ago, they'd be like, oh my God, you know, they'd be in amazement. But then,
can I suggest, most of our technological advances since the turn of the century haven't been anything substantial other than communication advances and things which keep us trapped within our cubicles. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're right, the combustion engine was a major, internal combustion engine was a major advancement forward. Semi-automatic firearms were an amazing advancement forward. But things like a smartphone, people think are wonderful because they have a computer in their hand. But what do they use that for? Just to be contacted 24/7 by their boss, or to look at something inappropriate on the internet, or to take a photo of their breakfast to pretend they're eating somewhere, fancy to make their friends jealous. I mean, so few of the real technological advancements since the turn of the century actually, I think, make our quality of life better. You might go, well, I can talk to my friends on the other side of the world on Skype. That's true, but does that make your average day-to-day quality of your life better? Does having a computer in your hand make you have a better, happier life than somebody had in 1955?
It just makes commerce better.
And makes people happier little citizens who are all contained and all obedient and all can just put on the Netflix, and they're all got something to keep them occupied. And then, oh, I'm retired. Oh, I'm dead. Well, that was fun.
Yeah. Well, but it's like, yeah, you spent your life as a wage slave, but at least you got to play Candy Crush.
Is that the new one? It used to be Angry Birds. I never play any of these things, so I don't know.
Whatever. It's whatever.
I was going to make a joke, but the wiser self got the better of me.
Sometimes Donnie does listen to the better angels of his nature. I'm really trying to avoid a bunch of jokes right now. Anyway, moving on. So Magnus says, I disagree. If I can get it to pop up. There we go. Says, I disagree with the cattle mutilations. If the U.S. government was doing it, they would have screwed up and been shot by a farmer by now. I mean, that's not a bad observation. I mean, Donnie and I share the same sort of thought that anything that requires hyper competence, the government's probably not going to be the one to pull it off. However, people have caught them doing it. They just get written off because it's not a part of the UFO. They're like, no, it's a helicopter that's got funny lights on it, or they can hear, or it's a silent helicopter. People have caught them doing it, and it freaked them out. But those reports get shoved aside because most UFO researchers want to hear aliens.
They want them aliens. The helicopter's not sexy enough. Helicopter's not sexy.
That's my position on Bigfoot, as you know, as well. If Bigfoots were really taking farmers' chickens, somebody would have shot one by now. Same thing, I guess. But then again, I presume
he doesn't take the chickens; he takes pigs.
Whatever he takes. Well, they take chickens sometimes. They take all kinds of things. The same applies, I guess, though, to an alien. I don't think an alien could escape being shot any more than a special forces team could escape being shot.
Yeah. No, it's true. But again, our special forces are pretty darn good at doing things. So particularly if you've got, and again, if you've got enough tech, some of this specialized tech that people are talking about them having, then yeah, I mean, in many ways, it makes a lot more sense for them to be the ones doing it. I think the bigger point here.
You're looking at night. They'd be using night vision technology, all kinds of things. Okay, the farmer's over there. We got 20 seconds or 2 minutes to do this, boys, before he can get here. If that's what's happening, I don't think they're going to get caught surprised by a farmer any more than they get surprised by an Afghani villager if they were doing some special ops in Afghanistan. They would be looking, okay, over here, this is happening, okay, let's go. If that's what's going on. I agree that they're not bulletproof, but I presume they'd be seeing where people were and what was going on when they did that kind of activity, if they are who were doing that kind of activity.
Yeah. And if you're in and out in 2 minutes, in the middle of the night, if they can't hear you coming.
To be honest, special forces technology today, that type of stuff is probably not that far removed from what we would have thought the aliens would have had in the 1940s anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like, as far as the ability to come in, go quickly, see in the dark, you know what I mean? All of these kind of things. They're almost that far advanced.
So I think the main thing about the special forces is that they're highly trained and there's a lot of experience behind them because, let's face it, gentlemen, this country likes war. And we kind of do it a lot. We kind of do it a lot. So we get lots of practice.
Yep. And again, that's That seems to be part of the plan, doesn't it?
Sometimes I feel like this
Right?
country.
I mean,
is
we've
more
talked about who,
warlike. Yeah, sometimes I feel like this country is more warlike than the Klingons. That's saying something.
Well, the
I think we're
country,
smarter about it than the Klingons.
I think there's a financial motivation for a military-industrial complex here that the Klingons don't have. The Klingons are more perhaps like samurai warriors, you know. They were
Yeah.
driven by a different impulse. Today, the impulse for war,
Mhm.
I think, at the higher level isn't, let's get out there and this is going to be great. And it's like, how much money can we make if we make 100 more F-16s and if we invent this new rifle and, you know, sell this country this? I think that's probably the motivation, to be honest.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean,
and winning
yeah.
would not be profitable because people would stop shooting each other, which is why we have to have forever wars.
Yeah, if war wasn't profitable, we probably wouldn't be doing it as much.
And don't forget, Eisenhower warned about this back when he said goodbye back in the 50s.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that speech.
And we've all but forgotten it now. The idea that there were contra-democratic forces, and not to say democratic because I'm not a Democrat, I'm a Republican, not meaning who I vote for, but I believe in a Republican system of government more than a straight democracy where just, you know, anything the majority decide, the majority get. I think we have a wonderful system here which has checks and balances. But Eisenhower warned us that those checks and balances were under direct threat by influences that weren't democratically elected, by powers and forces that were operating outside of any kind of governmental purview. And today, isn't this what we're talking about when we're talking about these type of, you know, ET revelations coming from supposedly, you know, secret military groups that have access to this down source of technology? I'd love to see what Eisenhower would be saying about this. Now, mind you, people say Eisenhower met the ETs at Wright-Patterson or wherever, so who knows? But
right, exactly. Well, but that's, I mean, that's a great point, right? Is that literally we're talking about the swamp, and the swamp is the intelligence organizations, but ultimately what it is that larger infrastructure where it's the people who make their money, their billions upon billions of dollars off of wars, essentially, off of stuff that no one's asked them to do. They create wars in order to have something so that they can ship off American lives and American dollars to launder it back to politicians and to launder it into organizations, pharmaceutical companies, the whole nine yards. It's just one big laundering scheme, and that's what he was talking about. Yeah.
Secret UFO programs ain't cheap, folks.
I mean, yeah, well, and that's a theory that's floated around, right? The whole breakaway civilization idea that all of this money is being shuffled off into these projects to create a breakaway civilization. Now, is that true? I don't know. I don't think we need to go there to know that they ain't using our money for good. That a lot of this stuff is probably not necessary and is being artificially generated. Which goes back to the question, the second question of the day, which is, why do they want us to think that there are extraterrestrials dropping off aircraft because the student driver left the parking brake on?
And I mean, there's so many, and this is where I'm less comfortable. I can say what they want us to believe, why they want us to believe it, I'm less sure about. I have several different theories. And one of those is just what we're talking about now. One of these is just the military industrial complex. All of a sudden, if there was an awareness that there was an ET threat, would that hurt or would that help the military industrial complex? Sure as hell isn't going to hurt it, you know?
It's not. Well, we literally talked about this on, I forget what show it was because I do so many now. But we talked about this, right? Where the woman who was the nurse to Werner von Braun said that they were going to stage an alien invasion to put weapons in space. That was what was going to happen. That this was what was part of the plan.
And that's Stephen Greer's point, because he took that interview and he ran with it in Cosmic Hoax along with other revelations. The difference is he thinks there are ETs. Just in his version, they're all friendly. But the type of stuff we're talking about now, these type of lead-ups to disclosure, according to Greer, is a phony disclosure, and it is to do exactly what we're talking about, what you're talking about then, to advance the interests of the military-industrial complex.
Jason, I got to ask, that nurse
Donnie, I
story,
see you pondering.
was that post paperclip or pre paperclip? That's the guy that was up.
Oh, it was like in the, I think Werner von Braun died in the 70s.
But the nurse he met when he was older, I guess, right? So
Yeah, the revelation is much.
She was taking care of him at the end of his life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was just before he died that this is supposedly his deathbed confession, essentially, to her, more or less.
He and Walt Disney were boys.
But again, yes, they were. Yeah. You want to get something, again, we've talked about this. You want to get something, you want to look weird? Look at the connections between Disney and the CIA. Gets weird real fast. Again, why is it that the lead singer of the Doors, why is his father the admiral that was over the Gulf of Tonkin incident? There's a lot of weird connections where you're like, this shouldn't be here. This doesn't make sense if everything's on the up and up. Like, we're going to do a thing on the eventually down the line. I've got a lot more research to do, but on the whole Nixon Watergate scandal and the people involved in that, where it's like, hey, it is presented one way to you in the media, but that's not what happened. This looks very, very different from what we've all been told that it was, because it's entirely possible that there was a political coup in this country, and it happened with Kennedy. And that Nixon was the second coup that sort of put that final nail in the coffin of, if you want to stay alive, if you want to have a future, you're going to play by these rules. And everyone since then, which is again why we saw things with Trump, he didn't play by their rules. He said things he wasn't supposed to say. He admitted things he wasn't supposed to admit. He didn't play their game. Again, a game that's ultimately probably nothing more than just continual warfare forever to fund the military-industrial complex.
Well, there's certainly suggestions too that Reagan was shot because he wasn't playing the game, and after he was shot, he towed the line more. So there are those ideas that presidents who don't play ball get in trouble. And I think most presidents we've known in our lifetime are probably essentially figureheads. And I love the system that we have. I love the Republican system of government. I can't think of a better one. But I do think it isn't the same as when, John Adams or Thomas Jefferson or, any of those, or even further on. I don't think it's even the same system as when Herbert Hoover was president or when Andrew Jackson earlier. Like, there were times where there were the executive officers who really shook things up,
No,
like if you look at Jackson, the stuff he did, like he antagonized all kinds of power elites, but you don't really get that, except maybe you're right with Trump. Whether you like Trump or you don't, whatever your partisan politics are, I think it's pretty clear that the establishment did not like Donald Trump. And you might go, well, that's because he was a brash idiot, so I don't like him either. And that might be the case, but you still have to ask, why did the entire establishment, including the Republican establishment in 2016, line up against him? There was some clear reason that the media, the government, the entertainment structure system did not like Trump. And you can go and do your own research and try to work out why that is. But I haven't, in my years of being interested in presidential politics, have seen anything equivalent to that disdain of a presidential candidate or a president ever. Maybe you could go back to Goldwater and you could say there was a real lineup against Goldwater as a presidential candidate, but that's before my time. So
there's one comparable figure I could think about in like more modern times. That would be Ross Perot. That guy took a thrashing in that election.
Well, but did he do what he was party? Did he do what he was meant to do? I mean, there's a great theory that he hated George Bush so much he ran that campaign just to make sure he wouldn't win. That's the one theory. One theory is they were apparently rivals, and he wanted to stuff up Bush's run. So he thought, I'll run if there's a third candidate, and I'll destroy him. And that's what happened. So you might be right. The media, I think it was enough to upset the election result. So I'm not sure whether Perot was the good guy or not the good guy. I don't know. You're right. There certainly wasn't necessarily people lining up saying he was the good guy, Donnie. So I take your point, but I don't know what
he was an outsider, and the guy had. Yeah, I just remember the election results, and well, I mean,
outsider may be a bit of a I get what you're not wrong, but so okay. I think this is one of those things where it is often that we paint everything with a broad brush. That is also the problem, because Dean brought it up earlier. When we see with a lot of the, particularly early on, OSI stuff, we see like the FBI and the CIA and the NSA seemingly stepping on each other's toes during some of these, when they're trying to manipulate these UFO researchers. They seem to be getting in their way from time to time, right? And conflicting. I think when we talk about the swamp or the deep state and the military industrial complex, we sort of imagine everyone like it's Hydra, where they all walk into some secret room and it's filled with smoke, and they're all like, okay, here's how everything's going to play out for the next 40 years. Rather than being like anything else, a bunch of people with a lot of differing agendas and interests, and they're not even talking to each other. Essentially, you have cliques within cliques. And so, yeah, it could be, Ross Perot, and there's some stuff I know about Ross Perot I'm not going to say online because I like living. That is, it's like, yeah, he's a part of that system, but he's a part of a system with a different agenda or different thoughts, right? So it's one of those things where I think it's very easy for us to say, well, and as if they all have the same agenda. They all work on the same plan. They're all on the same page, and they aren't. Lots of differing agendas, differing goals, and that can also lead to a lot of maybe the confusion that we ourselves are seeing. And it's not that, oh, well, it can't be the government doing this because otherwise they would do X, Y, Z. Well, it may be that one group wants this, the other group wants that. And what we're seeing is the conflict, and we're just assuming that it must be something else because they aren't all on the same page.
Yeah, we're forced to think in black and white all the time. So if there's things opposing each other, one side must be good, one side must be bad. But who was good out of Stalin and Hitler, and who was bad out of Stalin and Hitler? I mean, they were both like mad men, and it was both terrible totalitarian systems. And there are people in various camps normally who say, well, so Stalin was the lesser of two evils, including what the Allies said. They were both they were both crazy, both evil, both wicked, and both had totalitarian systems. But we're forced to make that distinction. And I think that happens again and again and again. We're forced to cast our lot with one side, where maybe we shouldn't cast our lot with either damn side.
Yeah.
Yep. Nuke them till they glow in the dark, and then shoot them, or nuke them till they glow, and then shoot them in the dark.
I feel like comparing Stalin and Hitler would be like comparing a mafia boss with a cult leader. It's like, what's worse? I don't know. They're just different.
Yeah. Well, it's Coke and Pepsi is what it is. It literally, they are the same thing, just different flavors.
It's just who's going to get it in the neck first under what ideology. Everyone's going to get it in the neck. You know what I mean? But what group's going to get it in the neck first, So
and of course it's always Hitler or Stalin. Where no one wants to call it Mao Zedong.
That's right? A very good point.
You want to talk about someone who's probably who's got the biggest body count in human history? It's probably Mao Zedong. I mean, by a mile.
Yeah, and people forget about the Japanese.
But moving on to everyone's questions.
And the thing is, Mao Zedong's regime Mao Zedong's regime never ended, unlike the other two. Hitler's regime ended in like the mid-40s. You can argue that Stalin's regime ended by, the late 80s. But Mao Zedong's regime continues. It's still rolling along. And now because and they spend so much money on Hollywood and buy so much of our farmland and so much of our advertising. You can't say that anymore. You can't say, well, hey, it's weird. One of those totalitarian regimes never got stopped, and now they're our trading buddies. Now they got most favored trading status with us. What happened there?
How that works.
Yeah. And to Donnie's point, look at, the Japanese, we completely just sort of ignore what they did.
Yeah.
But again, is as terrible as what the Japanese did. The numbers do not compare with China or Stalin but that gets ugly real fast. Real quick. I do want to come back to Larry Meitzer's question here in a second, but there's a running theme with several with several questions. I kind of want to. It just disappeared. Hold on. With several questions here, I'm going to run them through, and then we can kind of talk about the carry.
Before we do that, can I just ask you guys,
Sure.
both of you, a real quick question? Because you were earlier talking about the military-industrial complex, right?
Sure.
So, the way I see it, I think there are two possibilities of how the hypothetical UFO space program would fit into this idea. Would be either the military-industrial complex is using the UFO program to kind of, I don't know, false flag or deceive us or whatever, right? Or the other possibility is maybe the reason why they're so ruthless and hoarding all these resources for themselves is because they're trying to maintain and operate an actual UFO program.
So, both have been both theories have been presented. I think the easiest explanation is it starts off as a cover for black projects and spy works, right? But also kind of particularly with the abduction thing. And again, I do think there are people who have legitimate encounters that are beyond this, right? That are beyond any of this. That is truly interesting. We're going to get to those points here in a second. We'll probably end on that material, but I think the whole UFO thing has particularly by the time you hit the 80s and later, and maybe even earlier, also becomes a cover for experiments they run on people and psyops they run on people, because it allows you to isolate people, and then you can do whatever the hell you want to them, and no one's going to stop you because they think they're crazy, because it's happening by little green men. And instead, it's actually some dude in the Air Force, and they've got some good drugs and some psychiatric doctors that make you think that you were just experimented on by little green men. Instead, they were doing whatever the hell they want to you. And real quick, this is a great sort of comment I think ties into it. It goes, Danny Stanton says, those darn aliens can't stay away from farms and trailer parks. You're right, Danny. That's a really great point. They do seem to really like farms and trailer parks. Oh, you mean people who are isolated from other people and are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum and just more vulnerable to being abducted in the middle of the night and experimented on psychologically?
My big question has always been, how come I never hear of any Asian people or people in Asia ever getting abducted? They have UFO sightings in Asia, but you don't get accounts of people saying that they've been abducted. I never heard one.
Yep.
And I've searched, I've looked, found not one.
There
Plenty of UFO encounters.
There might be more common cultural tropes that somebody looks to if they have a paranormal experience in the middle of the night rather than little grey men. The cultural historian in me who thinks that there is some experiential reality to the abduction experience beyond the type of MyLab or military abduction stuff that Jason was suggesting then, which might also be possible. But I suspect maybe in Asia there are other tropes when you get disturbed in the middle of the night by something, whether it's your own psychology or whether it's an external spiritual force. Well, I think in the West now, when we have those experiences, it's easy to lump it in with, well, something came to my bedroom at night and, that must have been an alien, and that's the way the mind understands it. That's my suspicion anyway. And again, this is all speculation.
Yeah, it kind of bums me out sometimes. I'm like, man, I want to get abducted and see some aliens. But
until they brought out the probes, Donnie, and then you'd be saying, no, send me back.
Like, okay, never mind. I was wrong.
I can't say it. I have a perfect joke, but I can't say it. But since we've gone there, we'll come back to these other questions. But then let's go ahead and throw this out here, right? To your point. Radio Vault says, I don't think they're beings from other planets, but other dimensions, and follows up with, because they aren't ETs, they're demons. And I think this would fall under the non-military, the non-governmental material. I don't think they're, again, this is my viewpoint. Donnie can disagree. But I think Dean and I are on the same vein here. The stuff that's genuinely exotic, the stuff that is not military, not the government, is supernatural in nature. And in this form, people say, well, where would you disagree with Giorgio Tsoukalos, right? The hair guy from, Aliens. if you were to sit me and him at a table, we would agree on the following sentence: the angels and gods of the ancient world are the extraterrestrials and UFO nauts of today. We would agree on that sentence. Where we would disagree is he would say, because they were always extraterrestrials and ancient man just misunderstood them for what they were and made them supernatural. I would suggest we got it right the first time. They were supernatural, and this is just the newest form so that you don't recognize them for what they are, right? C.S. Lewis's materialist witch theory, which I've talked about a lot on this channel, the idea that there would be a way for a demon to make you believe in something supernatural without believing in supernatural. Because if you see a demon, then you're like, okay, well, then there must be a God. There's a place for your mind to go there. But if it's just an alien with advanced technology, okay, then they can abduct you and torture you, which we see in all of these abduction stories, where they're being experimented on, essentially molested sexually. They're being surgically worked on without anesthesia. And these people have Stockholm syndrome. Like, oh no, these are good people. No, they're demons. They're just tormenting you. But you don't recognize that for what it is. Because as far as you're concerned, it's some grays from Zeta Reticuli, and they're here to somehow use your DNA to save their species, and you're okay with that?
They're space demons.
Yeah, I think whatever your religious background, there's been enough compelling work done by people kind of within the community, be it John Keel or Jacques Vallée, or more recently people like Joshua Cutchin, or academics actually outside of the UFO community looking at it, I suppose, objectively as anybody can look at anything, that certainly draws very strong cultural comparative links between the modern abduction experience and other aspects of the UFO phenomenon with older cultural traditions going back through fairy faith into Christian religion, into other religions. So I certainly think that Jason is dead on the money, that you cannot look at the modern UFO experience, particularly when it involves contacts with allegedly extraterrestrial beings, and not be at least cognizant that there is comparative similarities with those experiences and experiences which the human race has been transcribing and describing and recording to time immemorial, since as long as there's been written records and cultural traditions.
Real quick, I love this, so I'm going to throw them up here real quick. Duke over at World Bigfoot Radio says, friggin' probe happy saucer jockeys. Let them go to space hell.
I like that avatar picture, by the way.
Yeah. I like the idea of space hell. So okay, interesting point here, right? Because I said they're space demons. Hear me out. How do we know that a lot of these things they are supernatural entities, but we don't know that they aren't hanging out on some other planet because they can't go back into heaven, right? Like they can't hang out in where God is for some of these creatures. Maybe, so it's like, okay, well, we got to go some other place to hang out and do things. There's no it's our own belief that we understand this stuff that keeps us from thinking maybe they are literal space demons. They're hanging out on some other planet somewhere, working and doing things and building craft. Because think about it. If you're God and you got some rebellious angels, you think you're going to let them have the car for the week? It's like, yeah, sure. You're going to keep fighting against me. Keep the car and the weapons that I gave you. Or is he going to take that stuff and now they've got to build things on their own? We make a lot of assumptions about all of this, and we never stop to ask that question. Maybe maybe they don't. Maybe they're not Superman where they can just fly wherever they want or go wherever they want. Maybe the Bible talks about them having vehicles. They have conveyances. It's entirely possible that God's like, okay, y'all don't get the family car, or you don't get the company car anymore. There's a dude who drives around. There's several people who work for Bud Light in the neighborhood where I live. I just see his car driving around. I'm like, you must be really lonely right now. But
yeah, he doesn't have many. He doesn't have many deliveries to make anymore.
Yep, probably not as busy as he would like to be. But again, you're God, And some dude is running, and it's like, okay, y'all are against me. Great. You don't get the company car that says Jehovah on it, right? It's like you get to go make your own cars. We don't know that that's not happening for some of these things, or even the Nephilim themselves. Whatever Nephilim are still around, whatever the long-term plan is, maybe they're like, look, we got to get off this friggin' planet because people like to kill us. And apparently you're not powerful enough to not get killed pretty quickly by humans. So let's be somewhere else. We don't know that that's not part of this math here. So again, for the genuinely sort of exotic stuff, maybe your space demon comment is more on point than you realize.
Maybe. I certainly think whatever these things are, they're deceptive. The entire phenomenon is deceptive. So when we're talking about the government being involved, it's loaded with deceit. When we're talking about these type of beings, whatever they are, I think we're talking about deceit. When we're talking about our own way of imagining what these things are, I think we're talking about self-deceit. But there's certainly the very real possibility that these things, your point that you just made aside, might just present themselves as things that they aren't. In fairy faith, there was a long tradition that what you saw was not what you got. The way the fairies presented themselves to you were not what they really looked like. Their lovely castle that you visited was really a dirty hole in the ground. The beautiful fairy maiden was really an old crone. That fantastic banquet was really horse dung. And certainly the Christian cosmology has the idea that these things are deceitful as well. There's a consistent idea that when you deal with paranormal entities, you should be very careful that what's being told to you and what you're even observing, particularly in the case of fairy faith, may not be the truth of what you're actually undergoing. And I think we need to remember some of these warnings from our cultures previously when we move forward with dealing with things that just because they're in technological guise now, i.e. flying saucers and tractor beams and big heads like they're from the planet Zeta Reticuli, this mightn't be what any of these, what we're actually experiencing really is. That isn't to take away from an experiential reality of some of these contact phenomena, because I do think things are happening, but to just accept that what you're being shown is the reality is, I think, dangerous. I make the analogy frequently because I like it so much. And that is that if a child was abducted by somebody in a clown costume who said their name was Funbo and he came from Disneyland, and if he escaped, let's hope he did escape or was released and came back home and told his parents, Funbo, the clown from Disneyland, took me. The police wouldn't start looking for a clown called Funbo and going to Anaheim, California and knocking on the door of Disneyland and saying, we've got a search warrant for Funbo. They know that there'd been a deception played on this child and some predator had appeared as something else. So why is it that people who, when they have experiences with entities, which for all intents and purposes, as we were talking about before, act maliciously and rape people and do all kinds of hideous things, why do we take them at face value as how they appear or what they say?
Nope. That's a great point. Real quick, Dear Galloway points out that David Grusch helped write the non-disclosure agreements rules. We talked about that in the first hour. That was one of the first things that Dean talked about was the connections between the former intelligence operative and his connections to that. He wrote those rules and his connections to the swamp, to some really like ultimate deep state people. So yeah, that was definitely our very much a big part of our first hour.
Real quick, guys, you know, it's been a pleasure and an honor sitting with you gentlemen, listening to your ideas, but unfortunately this is the point where I have to put my foot down and disagree with you both, because my personal position, Scientology was right. Dark Lord Xenu is out there, and the U.S. government is just doing what it's got to do to prepare for his onslaught. Tom Cruise is right.
You just want to roll in Mission Impossible 38 or whatever they're up to now.
Dark Lord Xenu is out there, folks.
This is not playing well on for our audio listeners because they can't see any of our faces. And perhaps and you know what? Perhaps the ultimate war, the ultimate weapon of our war against Xenu, when he returns, is the pineapple pizza.
It's their curse.
Yeah, which is why you know someone's really on the side of the Dark Lord Xenu when they hate pineapple pizza.
And in this example, okay, so one of the things I was thinking of while you guys were talking about the space demons earlier, what if what if demons are real but also aliens are real, but they operate on this, or they perceive reality on the same level, like on a level most likely deeper than ours, so that when the extraterrestrials look at Earth, they don't think of Earth as the planet of the humans, they think of Earth as the planet of the demons or the Nephilim. That's really their world, and the humans are just the window dressing.
Well,
the humans are the pineapple on that pizza.
Well, that was Shaver's point. Richard Shaver, who became famous from the Shaver mystery, publicized or published in Amazing Stories in the mid-40s before the UFO phenomenon erupted with Kenneth Arnold's sighting of the flying saucers over Mount Rainier in June 24, 1947. We're almost up to June 24 this year. We're almost at the anniversary. But Shaver believed that the ETs had left long before were coming back to this planet to try to loot the things that were underground in the caverns, and that sometimes there were actual fights between the Darrow in the caverns, which are essentially, I guess, a technologized demon, and the space entities. So you've touched on a number of points there, Donnie, that echo through the realms of paranormal and science fiction belief.
There you go. You proud of yourself now? Feel good?
My main point is just that Tom Cruise is right.
Okay.
That new Top Gun movie, Maverick, that's a gospel movie, folks.
I've heard good things. I need to see it. I'm not even being condescending or silly. I do want to see it.
Said it was awesome.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's on Paramount Plus right now if you've got that. But okay, it's not a spoiler because it was in the trailer. One of my favorite things is the Aurora project that they stand in, that they have him flying at the beginning. It's sort of the Mach 10 space, sort of a high altitude spy plane that he's test flying at the beginning of the film. One of my favorite things is when he's getting into the cockpit of it, right, for his flight. You see this smoke, sort of the old dry ice smoke, and it's like the detail they went to on that, because that's the liquid hydrogen. That's essentially the air condensing around the liquid hydrogen that they use for the fuel for the scramjet. I'm a nerd, and I love the whole the scramjet stuff, and we'll talk about that later. I'm just saying it's a good film, but that was one of my personal favorites. Was just they went to a lot of level of detail on this project. I'm a big Skunk Works fan. SR-71 is my favorite jet, so that's it.
You like jets?
I do like jets. We got just a few minutes left, so real quick. I think we can end on this point. Magnus Erm says, "Do you really want an average driver running a flying car, or do you want it self-driving?" Here's the thing: I don't want flying cars at all, because as someone who grew up as the son of a mechanic, no. I want cars on the ground. I don't want anyone in any flying cars ever. But that doesn't mean, but to Donnie's point, it doesn't mean we couldn't have a better technology for that. Like, we could have infinitely better technology in a lot of this stuff. It feels like we did sort of hit like a wall earlier on. All we've been doing is refining this idea down.
I would only be cool with flying cars if we truly mastered anti-gravity technology, like really used the propulsion system on UFOs on these cars, where like if you just leave it idle, it'll just sit there and float. Because the last thing you need is like a combustion engine flying car. I think those things are just going to start crashing down on you.
Well, I'm thinking like the repulsor technology from Star Wars, where the thing just kind of sits there and hovers, because it's literally it's really pushing itself off of the ground. That's my thing. Like, I'd be okay with that. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
you put someone in a flying car, people are gonna just die, just straight up. We can't even get people to drive on the friggin' road, or you're gonna have. It's gonna be chaos. People cannot drive on the ground. I don't want them in the sky.
Man, I was raised on the Jetsons, and all I can say is America, baby. Give me that flying car. I don't care what the cost. Freedom, baby. Freedom.
Yep.
I'm only half joking too.
I know.
Flying cars will
You're
vote,
half
and I'll be
joking.
voting for it.
Are you a boat guy, Dean?
So real quick, Dean.
Am I a boat guy?
Yeah.
I was only talking to somebody today at the lake going, I got to buy a boat. My father was Navy, so I grew up on a yacht that he had. And then my stepfather also had a yacht. So I'm from, I guess, a sailing family. Not that I have a sailing, boat of my own, ship of my own.
Yeah, I can't do boats. I get super seasick.
Me too. Well, although I will say this, I do, if I become rich and all of this good stuff, I still wouldn't buy myself these things. But if I did have to get a boat, I'd get a pontoon boat with a grill and like one of those double-decker ones where you can have stuff on top, but it has a grill on it. Just like, I'm okay with that. Being out in the middle of a lake.
They're popular. Yeah, in
day.
Wisconsin. Those pontoons, man, they're a popular thing here.
Do Texans always have to have grills with them everywhere they go? I know
Yes,
that's a trend with you
law.
folks. Is
It's a law.
is there like a grill on like a trailer you just kind of lug around with a chain?
Yes.
Okay, it's just I was curious about that.
No, you dude.
No, I'm serious.
We
It's
have
like
no, I'm not kidding. We have mobile grills. People go and
Yeah.
they'll drag these smokers out
Yeah.
and they'll sell barbecue on the in parking lots and all. Yeah, no, we absolutely have that.
Yeah, you like literally do. I was
Yeah.
like half joking. I'm like, like tailgating parties. Everyone's like, "Where's
Yes.
that? Who brought that grill? You got this big
Yes.
grill going on."
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. Like, that's not even. You cannot come up with a joke that we haven't beaten like 50 years ago. Like, whatever you think this, like, yes, no, grilling is a law here.
Has anyone ever tried to make a single serving grill? Like someone who just wants to grill just a burger just for themselves and is just big enough just for one burger. So it's like a pocket grill.
Yes.
Oh, that's
They
such
exist.
an invention exists?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Now it's okay. My friend just bought one. I haven't actually seen it. I need to look at it. I don't know if it uses propane, but it's essentially a grill that's for inside your house. But it's like it's small, so it's like a single. Like, to your point, it's like if you don't want to fire up the whole grill to cook one hamburger, that's what you got. Yeah, absolutely, they exist.
I always imagine a Texan with a crappy grill as the saddest Texan.
Yes, but they're usually someone from California.
Oh, nice one there.
I seriously did not have an opinion on Californians until they started moving here. Now I very much have an opinion on them.
Yeah, I lived there for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. My wife's in the Nextdoor app and she's just seeing what's going on. She's like, what are all these people doing complaining about asking what we're supposed to do when raccoons come into their backyard? Leave them alone. You're in friggin' Waxahachie, Texas. You're in the country. What do you mean? Who do you call when a raccoon shows up? What? It's a raccoon. Let it go. It's not going to steal anything.
You trap it and shoot it where I'm from.
Well, hold on. But hold on. Now, do you mean raccoons or possums? Because y'all in Australia, y'all got some weird.
No, I meant here. I'm sorry. I meant Wisconsin.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
And on that note, we just hit the 52-minute mark, so we should probably bid adieu. Dean, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me with you every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Central on the Untold Radio Network for our wonderful show, Mysterious Library, where we talk about books and documentaries and articles of all things strange and weird. And on Saturday night, I'm also on Untold Radio at 10 p.m. Central with all kinds of wonderful guests talking all kinds of weird. I'd love anybody watching, though, to just plug the Shaver Mystery .com into a search engine, which will take you just to my Facebook page for The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, the documentary that I'm currently producing, and give it a like and follow my journey as I investigate the role that Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver had in the development of UFO belief. Even the type of things we're talking about today had an origin, and that origin's way back in the middle of the 1940s. So,
thank you, Dean. Thank you, Donnie. Okay, this was the first of the last 3. We got 2 episodes left, and then you're going to have to go over to Jason McLean Questions Everything, the YouTube channel, if you want this wonderful Donnie and Jason material. So we will catch y'all next week. Donnie, anything you want to say?
We're not hard to find, folks. We're not hard to find. You know, you'll still see us around. Don't worry. We're not going nowhere.
We'll still be here.
Yeah.
But again, 2 more episodes, then you all get Danielle and her new show, and we'll announce more when that is available. We'll see. Again, thank you, Dr. Dean. ShaverMystery.com. We will see y'all later. Be good.